Cool. Okay, hello, welcome to EGX PAX Digital, and we've got a super special panel today where we're going to be talking about the future of racing games, something which is near and dear to my heart, and I believe near and dear to the heart of everybody who joins us for this panel today. So, without further ado, actually, let's just introduce everybody. I guess let's go clockwise. Joe, do you want to introduce yourself?
So, hi, I'm Joe Binks, Senior Designer at Sumo, currently working on Hotshot Racing.
Cool, awesome, and Lee?
Yeah, I'm Lee Mather. I'm the Franchise Game Director at Codemasters on the Formula One series. We've obviously very recently released F1 2020.
Cool. And I forgot your name already. I was going to call you Lucky Mountain Games because I had a little special spoiler in the bottom left. But
Hi, my name is Trevor Lay. I'm the Director at Lucky Mountain Games and the Creative Director on Hotshot Racing.
Cool, thank you, Trevor. And Robert.
Hi, I'm Robert Karp. I'm the Development Director on DiRT 5, which is coming out next month, which we're very excited about.
Cool, I'm excited about it too. Cool, awesome. I guess we're all sort of fans of racing games, I think it's fair to say. And so I kind of just wanted to be cool to get a bit of an understanding of kind of your history with the genre. I'm going to work the other way around now. Trevor, what's your kind of history? What got you into the genre?
So I've been a fan of racing games since very small. Used to go to Brands Hatch, which is near to where I live, to go and see rallycross and various other types of racing. So when I got into games, I worked on Burnout Dominator at EA, then moved to Rockstar to work on the LA Remix games at Rockstar London for a little bit. And then when I went independent, I wanted to make a retro-styled racing game like virtual racing and hard driving, but with the modern elements underneath, like with modern handling, multiplayer, things like that. So that's why Hotshot Racing was kind of like a goal project that I wanted to do, because it reminds people of where racing games came from when they went into 3D. Mm-hmm. And hopefully it will remind people of games in the 90s.
Yeah, it's something I'm super looking forward to. And it's obviously out so fairly soon, or will be out by the time this is even out. Cool, Robert, what's your kind of history of the genre?
This is a bit of a sad story. When I was 2 or 3 years old, maybe 4, my dad got this black Volvo, and when he'd get home from work, I'd just go out and sit in the car because I loved it. And I'm a fan of cars, and so I'm a fan of gaming, and so how could I not like racing games? We had Commodore 64 and I had a Game Boy, but probably where I spent the most hours in my youth was on a Mega Drive, playing games like, it's bad to say this because I work for Codemasters, but playing Micro Machines, because I absolutely love that, and also Road Rash. Then when I started in the industry, I actually worked as a tester on Formula One and a little bit on MotorStorm and some of the WRC games. And to be able to be on the other side of that now in development and work on DiRT 5's just awesome.
Yeah, totally. Lee, what about you?
Yeah, I'll try and keep it brief. So obviously, massive car fan ever since I was a small child. My mum will always tell people the story of how I'd walk up to random people in car parks and just tell them what car my granddad had, because cars, I just love them. But sort of earliest racing game memories, my dad's friend had a ColecoVision, which was an amazing console back in the day. And he had a game called Turbo, and it actually had a steering wheel and pedal, which you could use. And I borrowed that, and that was it. Absolutely in love. And then obviously through the Amiga generation, stuff like Supercars and Jeff Crummon's Grand Prix and Stunt Car Racer were games that I was obsessed with. And then I think probably the biggest obsession I had was Motor City Online, an EA online racing game that just didn't make it out of America, and it was a bit ahead of its time. But yeah, so I've always been massively into racing games. And then when I was at Elite Systems, my first job in the industry, I was sort of around the periphery of working on some of the handling for a game called DiRT Racer, which was an SFX game. I don't even think it ever got released. We did Power Drive. I worked a little bit on an off-road game. Then there's a big gap where I went off and did other things in the industry before obviously jumping onto F1 in 2008.
Cool, thanks. And Joe, what about you?
Well, going back in the day, playing things like Mario Kart and on the SNES, and also Micro Machines as well as one of the classics and that. But for me, one of the big games was when I got my GameCube, and thanks very much, Trev, for Burnout. Yeah, because I enjoy racing games. I'm pretty bad at them. So in Burnout, the fact that I was able to play against friends and nudge their cars into oncoming traffic and take them out and get a bit of an advantage that way was very very convenient for me. So that was always a great one. And then moving through things like Burnout 3, which is just a fantastic game.
Yeah, totally. I thought it was because Burnout 3 kind of recently, I saw there's an IGN list of like the best. I probably shouldn't talk about IGN and the Eurogamer thing, but anyway, who cares? There was an IGN list of like best racing games made, and Burnout 3 top of the list, which was like interesting because of, I think you can ask 50 different racing game fans what the best racing game is, and you'll come back with 50 different answers because of the genre's like so diverse. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting to see Burnout 3 up there, so well loved.
Yeah, and plus the soundtrack just screams early 2000s.
Yeah, totally, absolutely, totally. No one cares about me, but I'm going to talk about my entry into it. I'm just an absolute car lover. I'm in a shed full of pictures of Colin Chapman and Mario Andretti and various things, and so basically a huge car fan. And then one day found out that there's these video games where you could basically race cars around, and so started off with pole position on the Atari 2600, showing my age a little bit. And then basically I've played every racing game I can get my hands on ever since, and I've absolutely loved them. And they've come on such a long way as well. As a fan of racing games, it's been phenomenal to see kind of the progress from playing something like Jeff Crammond's Grand Prix I played a lot, and then obviously I'm a big fan of the modern F1 series. I think those games have done incredible work there, Lee. What kind of... Is what makes a good racing game back in the day, is it the same as what makes a good racing game now? Do you reckon? I'm going to ask any volunteers?
I think it's different.
Yeah.
I think back in the day you couldn't get the realism that you can get now. Arcade, for me anyway, arcade games were much better back in the day. Nowadays, arcade games are still great, and I still like them. But you can also get, like Formula One or Dirt Rally 2, a level of realism that you just weren't able to achieve before, and that can give greater immersion and greater satisfaction. Or if you play like me and do your tire in on the first corner, then somewhat frustrating.
What about you, Trevor? Kind of what do you reckon? Because you're obviously a fan of kind of the more vintage style of racing game, which you're kind of aping in Hotshot Racing.
The feeling I was trying to capture was the feeling that I got when I used to go down to the Trocadero in London back in the 90s and go and see like the bank of like virtual racing machines, and then later on the Daytona machines. So back then the graphics weren't too great, but I suppose we sort of filled in the blanks, like the bits that were missing and things like that. So for me, I think from virtual racing to like Hotshot Racing and modern arcade games, the core element of having fun while racing is still there, I think.
Yeah, totally. Joe, what about you?
Well, yeah, I think I pretty much agree there. It's the core elements for particularly arcade games. It's we're looking at being able to just pick it up and drive straight away and have fun, go sideways around corners, and the graphics as well. Although we've got modern games can have amazing graphics. Hotshot Racing it sticks to the old style. Obviously, it's a lot more high res, but the general idea from the old games is still there, and it's still got those nice sharp lines and the stylized approach to the visuals. So for certain types of games, it's exactly it's the same. The same essentials are there. Whereas for more simulation-based games, we want to be being able to have the better physics and the better graphics and having the decent weather effects. All of those allow us to make games that are significantly better than what they were.
Yeah, definitely.
In that genre, obviously.
And Lee, how about you?
Yeah, I think thinking back to the sort of the games that I used to play, the things that made them exciting and interesting to me back then are still the same as things as they are today. In the breadth of the genre. So, your simple top-down overhead racing game where you fire rockets at the car ahead was always fun. It's still fun today. It's just visually very different. Jeff Crammond's Grand Prix was amazing because it was a really good representation of a sport at the time. A game like F1, blowing our own trumpet, is that for F1 now today. Your good arcade games back in the day are now just still fantastic arcade races. They just look so much more spectacular. And you think about like a year ago, I worked on a game called E-Racer, and it was a competitive online racing game, and that was really good fun. And now today you've got things like Trackmania, which has got that wonderful depth of competition, but it's still a very simplistic game to play, but it's got so much depth to it. So I think the same sort of categories, if you want to pigeonhole games, still exists, but everything within them has just got so much bigger and better. But the actual basics of what makes a good racing game, it still holds true across all of them.
I guess it's like we've got more choice now. If you want to make an arcade game, we can do this with a really simple stripped down approach, or we can go really overboard and go as crazy as we want. And the same with the sim game. It's possible to get it absolutely nail everything as perfectly as we want, but to tone that down and add driving aids as well, if that's what's going to make it more fun for people to drive. So I think it's kind of how it was, but just giving the developers more. We now have more opportunities and more choices.
I think in some ways it might have been harder to make older racing games like Outrun, because you knew you couldn't make it look realistic. So you had to, from an art perspective, you had to make something stylized. Whereas now you can be like, well, we can make this look like the real world. You don't need to make it stylized. So making it stylized then is, almost like an extra layer on top.
Yeah, and then sometimes you can be stylized, and like I get young people asking me, when are you going to texture Hotshot Racing? Because it's vertex colored, and they don't realize that's how games used to look. And so they're like, where's the textures?
How useful, because obviously we've got that kind of dichotomy between arcade and simulation, and I know it comes up a lot, and I don't know how useful it is sometimes. I know because sometimes it seems quite... It is in my mind, because obviously I've been playing Project Cars 3, which kind of asks that question a lot and does something, and I'm sure coming the release of Dirt 5 as well, a lot of people are going to be like, they're coming from that off Dirt Rally, and they're going to be saying like, well, what's that, like, what's simulation, what's arcade? Is there a real distinction between the two? How useful is it, or is it just how useful is that term basically?
It's a trap.
You, Robert.
It's a trap. It's a trap you've laid.
I think it's a trap as well, because no racing game is completely realistic.
Yeah, totally.
And or maybe there's some that are completely the other way, but all of the games are different levels of, for me, what I like to think about it in terms of accessibility. So when people think about Dirt Rally 2, I think about that as being very hardcore and not very accessible.
Yeah.
If you're a bit late on the brakes on your first corner, it's in night, you can destroy your lights, and then you can be going around the rest of the track in pitch black. And Dirt 5 doesn't or tries not to do that. It tries to make it so that we like to think of it as a lean back racer. So you sit on the couch, you lean back, maybe you're playing split screen with friends. Whereas a Dirt Rally or maybe an F1, you're leaning forward. You've got to hit the racing lines. You've got to hit every corner just right. But there's loads of games that fall all the way in the middle of those labels.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember some of the old Burnout games. I remember being told that some of the simulation that's running under a Burnout game is just as hardcore as anything you'll find in something which calls itself a sim. But it's just you just layer stuff on it and it becomes something else. In the same way as you said about a simulation, it's all a question of interpretation. Still, it's not like you can't. Yeah, I'm obviously you're playing a part of physics a lot of the time, but it's about how you interpret it and get that feel, which is the most important thing.
Our physics engine underneath is completely simulation, and we've added things on top to help players. So if you want to talk about it in those kind of, if you asked our physics programmer, he would say, oh yeah, it's completely simulation. But to a gamer, that's probably not how they necessarily think or talk about them. Products.
F1's kind of the same, because when I play F1, I think to myself like, this is how I would imagine it feels to be an F1 driver when I'm playing it, because you got all the stuff, you got all that extra stuff goes, and then also just basically chasing deltas, looking after tyres and all that kind of thing, and that micromanagement. But I wouldn't call F1 I don't think many people would call F1 a simulation, but I think in some ways it simulates stuff better than some more hardcore simulations would.
I think, as Rob was saying, I think pretty much any racing game you play has a simulation, so therefore it is a sim. But people have they have perceptions in their mind of what they think a sim game should be and shouldn't be. whether it's a game like Formula One that is a massively intense simulation, but also caters to a broader audience. So maybe it gets pushed out of being classed as a sim by some people because it does offer the trimmings of a sports title as well. But as Rob was saying, it's like whatever you have under the surface. Our sim tech underneath in F1, we could build any car we wanted on that tech because it's simulating a car. That's what it's designed to do. It simulates the suspension, it simulates the aero, it does all the loading, so it does everything it needs to do to simulate a car. So therefore, it's a sim. But then how you use that is obviously what gives the different player-facing side to it.
Yeah. And obviously with something like Hotshot Racing, something like how hardcore is it handling underneath it? Is it iRacing with no textures basically, and then with the drift button, or what's the kind of simulation like underneath all that?
Again, under the hood, it's like Lee and Rob were both saying, it's a pretty hardcore racing sim under the hood. But everything on top of it is designed to allow you to be able to go sideways around the corner at 150 miles an hour. Well, not 150, but yeah. But yeah, it's everything in there. There's extra cheats which will allow cars to drift much more easily. We've got a boost system as well, which tweaks the physics when that kicks off. But yeah, essentially everything the cars are doing is physically modelled, just with a lot of stuff on top to allow you to do all the kinds of crazy stuff that we want.
Yeah. Trevor, what's your take on that?
I think because we were focusing on arcade, we were generally going for the main focus was a drift mechanic. So when we started off, when I started working with the sumo guys, what was our goal? So we were referencing a really old game called Split Second.
Yes.
Because that had a lot of Burnout team actually on that game down at Blackrock, and so it had a very Burnout style drift mechanic. So our focus was, let's get this drift right, and then we'll go from there on the handling and the other aspects from it. So for Hotshots, it was just focusing on one aspect and getting that right, and then everything else fell around it.
I remember Split Second had that really nice kind of pendulous weight to the cars where basically they feel like they got big fat asses, the cars, and they kind of swing around, which is what kind of peak Burnout's got. And I know like Need for Speed Hot Pursuit had that as well, just these cars with these nice big asses to get to swing around corners, which is amazing. I guess that's the kind of thing we're going for there as well.
Yep.
Awesome. That's good to hear. Racing games are like having such a moment right now, which is, as a fan of them, as I said, like I play every racing game I can, and at the moment it's nuts how many there are, and it feels like a bit of a golden era, to be honest, right now. The stuff that's coming out, I think. It's in really good hands. Codemasters are pumping out some of the best stuff they've done, I think, ever. Basically, they seem to really found their mojo. There's really cool arcade races like Hotshots, and there's loads of other things like in between. And obviously, on the more hardcore end as well, you've had the summer of kind of sim where everyone's been playing iRacing and R Factor as well, that kind of thing, because of everyone's stuck at home and doing virtual races. What's kind of behind this big moment? Why is a racing games basically back with a vengeance right now?
There's got to be multiple reasons. I think firstly there's been a drought from some of the big titles, should we say? I mean, let's say Gran Turismo does have large windows where there isn't a new one out there, so it gives a bit of space for other people. Some of the titles have been around now for a bit longer than normal. The games that have been coming out have all been fairly consistently of a really high quality. It's like there's not many racing games that have come out in recent years that I haven't desperately jumped on day one. Be it curiosity, professional curiosity, or just the fact that I play every racing game. And there's very little out there that's just a filler these days. I think the quality's up there. The competitive platform nature of racing games has gone through a massive boost in the last probably 2 to 3 years. I think that's really spawning a competitive platform out there. There's people who are starting to see that it's a valid route into the real world of motorsport. So that's another way of doing it. And then there is still the sheer fun of playing a racing game. It's prohibitive to go out and do these things in the real world. Obviously I'm not going to go out and do a Call of Duty either, but I'm certainly not going to go out there and spend my evening donutting round roundabouts and jumping off bridges and things. Or that's the sort of thing that it's that escapism, and it's fun, and it's competitive as well. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why I think racing games right now are having such a resurgence. But I think it is just there's a real broad spectrum of racing games out there right now. Somebody's catering to pretty much every part of the audience, and I think that's, it sort of starts to bleed between them a little bit as well. You've seen people who've played F1 for years, and they've started to look at iRacing, as you say, or R Factor and the competitive online side, or they'll start to say, maybe I fancy something a bit more arcade because now I can play F1 with the assists on. It's like, I'm really enjoying this. Maybe I should look at some of the other racing games that are out there. So I think everybody's doing a much better job of catering to a broader audience, and it's piquing interest across the genre.
Yeah, definitely. It feels like racing games are in like ruder health than motorsport itself sometimes. It's like it seems to be doing better than the actual discipline itself. It's an interesting point you're saying about like having. I can't remember the last time I played a bad racing game. They've all been so good for so long now. Everyone's just basically knocking out the park. It's great. Yeah, Joe, what do you think? What's behind kind of this golden era we're at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's this sort of thing. Just people being able to play, no matter what your level of ability or interest, there's something that's out there that will fit you. Like, it was a couple of years ago when we released Team Sonic Racing. I got my little niece, who was like 5 at the time, playing that, and she was dreadful, absolutely terrible at it, but she was loving it. She was loving just trying to drive around the track, crashing into the walls, not knowing where the hell she was supposed to be going. But yeah, she was just really enjoying it. And as soon as Hotshot is out, I'm sure I'll be able to get her on that, and she'll be crashing into walls on that and loving that as well. So yeah, in a few years' time, maybe she'll be on F1 and crashing into walls and being terrible at that game. So yeah, and maybe I hope at some point she'll start to get good, and then that's another generation of kids who are going to be growing up enjoying and playing racing games.
I've been playing racing games for 30 years. I'm still not good at them, so it takes time. What about you, Robert?
It's an interesting question. It's hard because I'm not very good at looking back, but I feel like, I don't know if it was 5 years ago or 7 years ago or 10 years ago, it felt like almost like games had been, racing had abandoned games and there were no good racing games about. And I don't know if everybody saw that and thought, racing games are still great, we need to go and make some good ones. And loads of people started making them and slowly iterating, and they've just got better and better. Because, now, Need for Speed's been around for what, 25 years or something? And, they've had some hits, some great hits, and they've had some that haven't quite necessarily done as well as that. And they keep going, but then, you've got a set of Corso Project Cars, as we mentioned, smaller, more arcade ones. And I think there's something really there for everybody now. And, as a racing fan, it's fantastic.
Yeah, definitely.
I think as an indie developer, having game engines like Unity and Unreal have allowed developers to build games like Art of Rally.
Yeah, I'm so looking forward to that.
Top-down game that looks really good. You've got Inertial Drift, which is a very neon-styled Ridge Racer-style game. So in the indie scene, people are also taking, bringing the racing games that they want to see as well.
Inertial Drift, actually, I only just played that for the first time last week, and I'm hoping to. We're going to be reviewing it as well. But it's fantastic. It's like a Ridge Racer type 4-esque thing if no one's played it, which is like a twin stick racing game, and it sounds nuts, but it works. So you use like the second stick for the drift mechanic, and it's just found this real sweet spot, I think, when it comes to its handling. So I've played a bit, but I'm looking forward to playing more. But yeah, stuff like that, it's just incredible seeing just stuff of that caliber, and Art of Rally as well, obviously, which is looking great. We should actually talk about Hotshot as well, actually, because that's coming out. That will be out by the time this is. I'm hoping. I've just been told the release date, and I'm hoping to get code soon so I can play it. But what's your kind of plans for that after release? Do you know where you're going to take it next?
So we're planning to launch it on the 10th of September, and it's going to be supported by some DLC drops after launch as well. So look forward to having some more information about those coming out soon.
We're on Xbox Live from day one as well. So.
Sweet.
On Game Pass, yeah.
Yeah. Want to grab that? Yeah.
I was going to ask about next gen versions, but that's not fair to dump that on you. So I won't, because it's nothing you won't be able to talk about this yet, I guess. But we can talk more generally about next gen because of I think kind of Robbie, you're probably the only person here who's kind of can speak more openly about it, because you obviously it's a key part of Dirt 5 with the 120 frames per second mode and all that. So maybe you're the best person to start when it comes to talking about what next gen is going to bring to racing games.
Sure. I mean, I think for games like Hotshot Racing, one of the best things about next gen is the backwards compatibility. So, people who go and buy their new consoles are going to have libraries there of games that they love and or haven't played yet, and be able to pick them up, and they'll run just as well. And all the platform holders will probably love me for saying that. I think what next gen brings is brings more power. So that means better physics updates, more graphical resolution, better textures. And I think that when we talked earlier about in the olden days Sims, weren't there were still simulations, but they weren't quite as realistic as they are now. I think next gen brings that next step. For things like 120 frames, we don't really know how that's going to go down or what that's going to be like for people, how many people actually have TVs that can handle that. So, it's really, we feel like we're standing on the edge of the cliff, and hopefully it's not a long fall and it's a good thing. But it's really exciting.
And Lee, I don't think next year's F1's been announced, but I don't think it's probably too much of a stretch of the imagination to imagine there will be one, and it might be on next gen consoles. What could you, in kind of obviously broad terms, what do you reckon next gen can bring to F1?
I think very much in the vein of what Rob was saying, is that obviously everybody will gain performance, and probably the biggest gain for a racing game, in particular a racing game where the inputs are very, very direct and very calculated, is that at the higher frame rates you do reduce your input lag. That's a really obvious thing for something like F1, but for any racing game really. But I'd like to think as well that with more power and more tech, it allows us to afford sort of other areas of the team to concentrate more on the gameplay side of things as well, because we've got the great tech in place at Cody's that's very scalable.
Yeah.
So we'll continue to build upon that for our engines will continue to be built upon for future consoles, PC generation, whatever we move to. But it should afford us that extra level of creativity as well, because the team can concentrate on other areas as well.
Cool, I look forward to it. Yeah, and it's going to be fascinating to see what happens with it. Sorry to land this one on you, but because I'm sure people are going to ask in the comments when this goes up anyway. What about VR for F1 in the future? Is that something that next gen might make more viable?
I can't remember. I kind of try to remember what I said on my last press tour, my virtual press tour, which took place from this very seat. F1's something we're very committed to for the future.
Okay, that's totally fair enough. What about kind of where do you see just the genre as a whole going in like obviously the next gen brings certain things to it. What do you think is like the next big innovation for the genre? Where do you think the next big idea is going to come from?
Probably one of these 4 rooms.
I was going to say, you're more than entitled to say it's going to come. I'll have to wait till next week or for in October, I think, isn't it, when Dirt 5 comes out? Yeah.
October. Probably not from this one. It's difficult to know where the next big innovation is going to come from. If we knew that, we'd all have our money there. And they often come from unusual places. Is it bigger races with more cars? Is it something a lot more innovative than that?
I think as Trev was saying about the strength of the indie game community with racing games, I think there's a fair chance that something will come from there. Someone will just make something that is some weird, quirky idea that they've just think would be really cool, and it'll turn out to be something that everyone sees and goes, "Oh yeah, I'll have a bit of that," and you'll start seeing it popping up in loads of different racing games. So I think
I've been playing Microsoft Flight Simulator pretty intensely for the last few weeks. I'm just waiting for the technology to be there so that it can actually render like road detail at decent enough levels so I can drive really boringly around the world at like 30 miles an hour, which is exactly what I want to do. That'd be amazing. Yeah, I can't wait. Cool. Well, I'm gonna leave it there. Thank you so much for coming along, guys. It's been a real pleasure to have you all here. And yeah, as I say, it's a delight to see racing games so healthy at the moment, thanks to all your good work. So I can't wait to play what you two guys have come up with, and obviously you as well, Joe, with Hotshot Racing and Dirt 5. And Lee, looking forward to seeing where you take F1 next, as I think I'm a big fan of what you've done with it so far. So looking forward to seeing where it heads next. So cool. Thank you very much, guys. And I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.
Thanks.
See ya.
See you guys.